"Touch me again and I'll scream," she whispered. Mafia boss pulled the maid closer in the dark hall. The alarm did not beep. It buzzed, a low and vibrating hum against the wooden crate Mila Santos used as a nightstand, dragging her from a dreamless sleep into the biting cold of 4 a.m. Mila did not groan. She did not roll over and bury her face in the thin pillow to steal 5 more minutes. She simply opened her eyes, staring up at the slanted ceiling of the attic room that had been her home for the last 6 months. The darkness was absolute, save for the faint gray light filtering through the singular, grime-streaked window that overlooked the sprawling grounds of the estate. Her body ached. It was a dull, persistent throb in her lower back and the soles of her feet, a reminder of the 14 hours she had spent scrubbing, polishing, and fetching the day before. Mila sat up, shivering as the air hit her skin, and swung her legs over the side of the narrow cot. Her bare feet met the cold floorboards, and the shock of it helped to clear the fog from her mind. She began the mental arithmetic that governed her life. It was a ritual, a prayer she recited to keep herself from falling apart. $70,000. That was the original number. The price of her father's addiction, the sum of his bad luck and worse decisions at the card tables run by the Varani syndicate, $52,000. That was what remained. Mila stood and moved to the small basin in the corner to splash freezing water on her face. She scrubbed the sleep from her eyes, drying her skin with a rough towel. If she worked every shift available, if she took no days off, and if her father managed to stay away from the tables, she could clear the debt in 18 months. 18 months of invisibility. 18 months of keeping her head down and her mouth shut. She dressed quickly in the uniform that always felt 2 sizes too big in the shoulders and too tight in the waist, a stiff gray dress with a white apron that marked her as property of the house. She pulled her dark hair back into a tight bun, securing it with pins until not a single strand threatened to escape. In the mirror, her brown eyes looked back at her, framed by dark circles. But the resolve in them was hard like flint. She was 23 years old, but in this house, she felt ancient. By the time Mila descended the narrow servant staircase and entered the main body of the mansion, the sun had not yet risen. The Varani estate was a fortress of limestone and iron, situated high on the hills overlooking Ravensburg. It was a place of breathtaking, terrifying beauty. As she moved through the west wing, her canvas shoes making no sound on the polished marble floors, she felt the oppressive weight of the house pressing down on her. Every surface in the mansion gleamed with a cold, hostile perfection. Massive oil paintings of stern-faced men and women, ancestors of the Varani bloodline, lined the walls, their eyes seeming to follow her as she dusted the baseboards. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen tears from the high ceilings, catching the faint light of the security monitors that blinked red in the corners of every room. This was not a home. It was a monument to power, built on fear and maintained by violence. Mila kept her eyes on the floor. It was the first rule of survival here. Do not look. Do not listen. Do not exist. She passed 2 men in dark suits standing guard near the entrance to the library. They were thick-necked and silent, their hands clasped loosely in front of them. But Mila knew what bulged beneath their tailored jackets. She could smell the stale scent of tobacco and gun oil on them as she squeezed past with her cleaning cart. They did not move out of her way. To them, she was less than the furniture. She was a ghost with a feather duster. She hurried to the kitchen, her heart rate settling only when she was among the clatter of pots and the smell of brewing coffee. But even there, the shadow of the man who owned them all loomed large. Dante Varani. Mila had seen him only a handful of times in 6 months, and never close enough to see the color of his eyes. He was a figure of whispers and terror, the head of the Varani syndicate, the man who held her father's life in his palm like a crushed die. She saw him from the periphery of the dining room when she was allowed to clear the plates after a formal dinner. He sat at the head of the long mahogany table, separated from his lieutenants by a vast expanse of polished wood. He was in his early 30s, younger than the men he commanded, but he possessed a stillness that the others lacked. He was sharply dressed, always in suits that cost more than Mila would earn in a decade, cut to fit his broad shoulders and lean frame with military precision. He did not shout, he did not laugh. He spoke in a low, controlled baritone that made the other men at the table stop eating and lean in to listen. He was ruthless. He was precise. He was the monster in the castle. And Mila did everything in her power to stay out of his path, but the house had a way of shrinking when he was inside it. Later that morning, Mila was assigned to clean the library, a room usually forbidden to the lower staff. The head housekeeper, Mrs. Goretti, had barked the order at her, citing a spilled drink from the night before that needed immediate attention. Mila had entered the room cautiously, the smell of old paper and leather rushing to meet her. She was on her hands and knees, scrubbing a stain from the Persian rug. When the heavy oak doors opened, Mila froze. She scrambled to gather her bucket and rags, intending to flee, but the voice that drifted into the room froze her in place. It was him. Dante Varani walked into the library, his phone pressed to his ear. He did not see her crouch behind the high-backed leather armchair. "I do not care about the delay," Dante said, his voice cutting through the silence of the room like a razor. "If the shipment is not in the warehouse by midnight, you tell Salvaro that he can explain the loss to me in person and tell him to bring a shovel." The threat was delivered with such casual, icy indifference that Mila felt a shiver race down her spine. This was the monster. This was the man who ordered deaths as easily as he ordered wine. Dante ended the call and tossed the phone onto the desk. He sighed, a heavy, weary sound that seemed to scrape against the silence. Mila held her breath, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She waited for him to leave, praying he would not walk around the desk and find her there. But he did not leave. Instead, Dante walked over to the fireplace, where a single silver frame rested on the mantel. Mila peeked through the gap between the chair and the wall, her curiosity momentarily overriding her survival instinct. Dante stood in front of the photograph. His posture, usually so rigid and commanding, slumped slightly. He reached out, his long fingers adjusting the frame by a fraction of an inch, ensuring it was perfectly straight. It was a picture of a woman, beautiful, dark-haired, with a smile that reached her eyes. His mother. Mila knew the stories. She had died when Dante was just a boy, a casualty of the life his father had chosen. For a long moment, the ruthless crime boss stood there, his hand lingering on the cold silver of the frame. He looked tired, not just physically exhausted, but soul-weary. The harsh lines of his face softened, revealing a glimpse of something human beneath the armor of the syndicate leader. He looked lonely. Then, the mask slammed back into place. Dante straightened his cuffs, turned on his heel, and strode out of the room without ever looking down. Mila let out a breath she felt she had been holding for minutes. She finished cleaning the spot on the rug with trembling hands, the image of his gentle touch on the picture frame burning in her mind. It made no sense. A man who threatened people with shovels should not have hands that moved with such tenderness. It made him real, and that was dangerous. It was easier to hate a monster than a man. The day wore on, bleeding into evening. The mansion grew quiet as the staff retreated to their quarters and the guards rotated their shifts. Mila, however, was behind schedule. She had been tasked with polishing the wainscoting in the long corridor of the East Wing, near Dante's private office. It was tedious work, requiring her to kneel on the hard floor and buff the wood until it shone like glass. The grandfather clock in the hall chimed 11. Mila's knees were bruised, and her fingers smelled of lemon oil and beeswax. She was alone in the semi-darkness, the only light coming from the wall sconces that cast long, distorted shadows across the floor. She was just finishing the last section, preparing to stand up and stretch her aching back, when the door to Dante's office cracked open. A beam of golden light sliced across the hallway floor. Voices spilled out, angry, hushed, and urgent. "We have a leak. Rico, I know we have a leak." Mila froze. She knew that voice. It was Dante, but darker and angrier than she had heard him in the library. "Rico Marino, the consigliere," replied. his tone placating but tense. "We are looking into it, Dante. But the Costello crew is moving fast. They know about the shipment routes. They know about the safe houses. Someone is feeding them everything." Mila's stomach turned to ice. She knew she should not be here. Hearing this conversation could get a person killed. She grabbed her spray bottle and her rag, moving as silently as she could, trying to inch backward into the shadows of the alcove behind her. "If Costello strikes tonight," Dante snarled, the sound of glass shattering following his words, likely a tumbler thrown against the wall. "We're going to lose the South Territory. Find the rat. Rico. I do not care who it is. I want them found, and I want them dealt with. I will handle it," Rico said. "But you need to be careful. If they have someone on the inside, you are a target in your own home." "I am always a target," Dante replied, his voice dropping to a deadly calm. "Go, handle it." Mila scrambled to her feet, panic seizing her chest. She had to get away before Rico came out. She turned to run back toward the servants' stairwell, but in her haste, her foot caught on the edge of the runner rug. She stumbled forward just as the office door swung fully open. Dante stepped out, turning to say one last thing to Rico, and walked straight into her. The impact knocked the wind out of her. She collided with a wall of solid muscle and expensive fabric. Her spray bottle hit the floor with a loud clatter that echoed like a gunshot in the silent hallway. Her rag fluttered down to land on Dante's polished shoe. Mila gasped, stumbling back, losing her balance. She flailed, expecting to hit the hard marble floor, but a hand shot out and clamped around her wrist. The grip was iron strong. Dante yanked her forward to steady her, pulling her out of the open hallway and against the wall, away from the line of sight of the office door where Rico was still gathering his papers. Silence descended, heavy and suffocating. Mila was pressed against the silk wallpaper, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might bruise her ribs. Dante stood over her, crowding her space, his body shielding her from the rest of the corridor. He was close, too close. She could smell him, a dark, intoxicating mix of sandalwood, crisp linen, and the metallic tang of adrenaline. Heat radiated from his chest, searing through the thin fabric of her maid's uniform. Dante did not let go of her wrist. His fingers were wrapped completely around it, his thumb pressing into the frantic pulse point at the base of her palm. He looked down at her, his dark eyes wide with surprise that quickly hardened into suspicion. "What are you doing here?" he asked. His voice was a low rumble, barely a whisper, but it carried a menace that made Mila's knees weak. I was cleaning," Mila stammered, her voice trembling. I didn't hear anything." His gaze swept over her face, sharp and assessing. He was looking for a lie. He was looking for a reason to make her disappear. The hallway was dim, the shadows clinging to his sharp jawline and the hollow of his throat. "You were listening," he accused, stepping closer. His hips brushed against hers, a shock of contact that sent a jolt of electricity through her veins. It was fear, she told herself. It was only fear. "No," Mila whispered, pressing herself flatter against the wall, wishing she could melt into the plaster. "I swear, I was just leaving." Dante stared at her. The anger in his eyes shifted, replaced by something else. He seemed to suddenly realize how close they were. He looked at her wild hair, which had partially escaped its pins in the collision, and the flush of terror high on her cheeks. He looked at her mouth, her lips parted and trembling. He did not step back. Instead, he leaned in. The air between them grew thick and charged. Mila could feel his breath on her cheek, warm and scented with scotch. The hand on her wrist tightened, not hurting her, but anchoring her to him. The sheer size of him was overwhelming. He was a predator, and she was the rabbit, caught in the open, but beneath the terror, a strange, treacherous heat bloomed in her stomach. It was the way he looked at her, not as furniture, not as a ghost, but as a woman he had trapped. His gaze dropped to her lips again, lingering there. The silence stretched, vibrating with unsaid words and a tension that felt like a pulled wire. Mila's breath hitched. Her mind screamed at her to run, to beg, to apologize, but her body betrayed her. She leaned into his touch, just a fraction of an inch. Then, the survival instinct kicked back in, sharp and desperate. "Touch me again and I'll scream," she whispered. The words hung in the air, fragile and terrified. Her voice was breathy, shaking with a confusing mix of fear, anger, and something she didn't want to name. It was a ridiculous threat. No one would help her. If she screamed, his guards would come, not the police, but it was the only weapon she had. Dante went still. He looked at her, really looked at her, his dark eyes searching hers. He seemed surprised by her defiance, by the spark of fire in the trembling girl he held captive. A flicker of something passed across his face. Amusement? Respect? Hunger? He did not pull away. He leaned in closer until his forehead was almost touching hers. He was not kissing her, but he was sharing her air, letting their breaths mix in the narrow space between them. For a second, Mila thought he was going to call her bluff. She thought he was going to crush her mouth with his and take whatever he wanted, and God help her. For one insane, fleeting heartbeat, she wanted him to... Then Dante blinked, and the spell broke. He loosened his grip on her wrist, his fingers sliding slowly away from her skin, leaving a phantom burn behind. He stepped back, putting a foot of cold, empty space between them. He straightened his jacket, the mask of the syndicate boss sliding back into place, though his eyes remained dark and turbulent. "You heard nothing," Dante said, his voice flat and devoid of the heat that had been there seconds ago. "Do you understand? You were never here. You saw nothing. You heard nothing." Mila nodded mutely, clutching her wrist against her chest. "Good," he said. He looked at her one last time, his gaze lingering on the pulse that still fluttered in her throat. Then he turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows of the corridor without looking back. Mila slid down the wall until she hit the floor. Her legs refused to hold her weight. She sat there in the dark hallway, surrounded by the smell of lemon polish and the lingering scent of his cologne, gasping for air as if she had just surfaced from deep water. Later, in the safety of her tiny attic room, Mila lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. She pulled the blanket up to her chin, but she couldn't stop shivering. She replayed the moment over and over again in her mind, the roughness of his hand, the heat of his body pressing her against the wall, the way his eyes had darkened when she threatened him. She should be terrified. She was terrified. He was a dangerous man, a killer. The reason her father was a broken shell of a person. But as she drifted toward a restless sleep, Mila touched her own wrist where his fingers had been. Her skin still felt warm, and in the quiet of the night, she could not lie to herself. It wasn't just fear that made her heart race. It was the sudden, terrifying realization that when he had leaned in, she hadn't wanted him to stop. The morning sun that bled through the heavy velvet drapes of the Varani estate was pale and watery, offering little warmth to the stone walls of the mansion. For Mila Santos, the light marked the beginning of another day of performance. She pulled her gray uniform onto her body, smoothing the stiff fabric over her hips, and checked her reflection in the cracked mirror of her attic room. Her face was composed, her hair pinned back in a severe bun that allowed no stray wisps to escape, but her hands told a different story. They trembled. It was a fine, almost imperceptible tremor, shaking the tips of her fingers whenever she reached for her hairbrush or buttoned her collar. It was the aftershock of the night before, a physical memory of being pressed against the wall in the dark hallway, trapped by the scent of sandalwood and the overwhelming presence of Dante Varani. Mila forced herself to breathe, in, out. She had a job to do. She had a debt to pay. $52,000 stood between her and freedom, and she could not afford to let a moment of fear or the confusing, hot twist of attraction that had accompanied it derail her. She descended the servants' stairs, her canvas shoes silent on the wood. The house was waking up, the low hum of activity starting in the kitchen where the cook was already shouting orders. Mila kept her head down, grabbing a stack of linens and a silver coffee service tray. She moved through the corridors like a shadow, making herself small, making herself invisible. But the house felt different today. Every shadow looked like him. Every footstep on the floor above sounded like his. When she had to pass the specific stretch of hallway near the East Wing office, her chest tightened so painfully that she had to stop for a second, clutching the silver tray against her apron to stop the rattling of the china cups. The air there still seemed to hold the charge of his anger and the ghost of his breath against her cheek. "Touch me again and I'll scream." She had actually said that to the head of the Varani syndicate. The memory made her stomach turn over with a fresh wave of nausea. In the dining room, Dante sat at the head of the long mahogany table. He was alone. The morning light caught the sharp angles of his face, illuminating the dark stubble on his jaw that he had not yet shaved away. He was reading a file, his brow furrowed in concentration, a cup of black coffee steaming near his hand. Mila entered the room, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She moved to the sideboard to refill the carafe, praying he would not look up. She focused entirely on her task, her movements mechanical. Lift, pour, set down, do not look at him. Dante did not turn his page. He did not move his head, but his eyes shifted, lifting from the text to track the woman moving across the periphery of his vision. He watched her hands. He saw the way the silver pot shook slightly as she lifted it. He saw the flush that rose on her neck, staining her pale skin a deep, reactive pink whenever she came within 10 feet of him. She was terrified of him. That was good. Fear kept people alive in his world. Fear kept them loyal, or at least obedient, but beneath the satisfaction of his control. Dante felt a prickle of irritation. It sat hot and uncomfortable in his chest. He was annoyed that he noticed the shaking of her hands. He was annoyed that he remembered the exact shade of brown her eyes were when they had widened in the dark hallway. He was the head of the most powerful crime family in the state. He had a war brewing with the Costello crew, a traitor in his ranks, and millions of dollars in shipments to coordinate. He did not have time to be distracted by a maid with a debt she could never hope to pay. Yet, as she turned to leave the room, keeping her eyes fixed firmly on the carpet, Dante found himself tracking her exit until the heavy door clicked shut behind her. He clenched his jaw, annoyed at his own lack of discipline, and forced his eyes back to the file in front of him. Later that afternoon, the rhythm of Mila's day was shattered by a new order from Mrs. Goretti. "The boss wants his private office cleaned," the housekeeper said, handing Mila a bucket of specialized wood polish and a set of microfiber cloths. "He's out meeting with his captains. Go now, and be quick about it. Do not touch the papers on his desk. Do not move anything unless you have to." Mila nodded, taking the supplies, but her insides turned to water. The office, his sanctuary, the place where she had overheard the conversation that had nearly gotten her killed. She walked to the double oak doors, her hand hovering over the brass handle for a long moment before she summoned the courage to push it open. The room was empty, bathed in the golden light of the afternoon sun. It smelled intensely of him, a mix of old paper, leather polish, and that distinct, spicy cologne that seemed to cling to the air long after he was gone. Mila moved into the room, leaving the door slightly ajar. She started with the bookshelves, dusting the spines of leather-bound volumes that looked as if they had been read 100 times. She moved to the leather armchairs near the fireplace, wiping down the wood. The leather was worn in places, soft and creased, shaped by the weight of a man who spent long, sleepless nights sitting there, staring into the fire. It was an intimate detail, a sign of humanity in a room that felt like a command center. She reached the massive mahogany desk last. It was covered in stacks of files, maps, and a laptop that was closed. Remembering Mrs. Goretti's warning, Mila moved carefully, dusting around the edges of the chaos. Her eyes landed on a small, framed photograph tucked behind a crystal decanter, almost hidden from view for anyone sitting on the other side of the desk. She paused, her cloth hovering in midair. It was a picture of a woman with dark, laughing eyes, holding a small boy in her lap. The boy was looking up at her with an expression of pure, unguarded adoration. He had a small scrape on his chin and dirt on his knees. It was Dante. It had to be. The boy in the photo looked nothing like the cold, lethal man who ruled this house, and yet the shape of the eyes was the same. Mila felt a strange pang in her chest. He had been a child once. He had been loved. He had a mother who laughed. It was a stark contrast to the violence she knew governed his life now. It made him seem lonely. She shook her head, scolding herself for the thought, and reached for the heavy crystal paperweight that sat atop a stack of invoices. It was a solid block of glass, etched with the Varani family crest. She lifted it to dust underneath. The door clicked shut behind her. Mila jumped, her heart leaping into her throat. The sudden movement made her fingers slip on the smooth, polished glass of the paperweight. It tumbled from her grasp, gravity pulling it toward the hardwood floor where it would surely shatter. She gasped, lunging for it, but a hand shot out from behind her, faster than thought. Large, warm fingers clamped over hers, trapping the paperweight against her palm just inches before it hit the desk. Mila froze. She was pressed back against a hard, solid chest. An arm was reached around her, enveloping her. The hand covering hers was rough, the skin calloused, radiating a heat that seemed to sear through her own cold fingers. She stopped breathing. Dante stood directly behind her, his body acting as a cage. He had moved so silently she hadn't heard him enter. For a second, neither of them moved. The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by the ticking of the clock on the mantelpiece. Slowly, Dante guided her hand back to the desk, setting the paperweight down with a soft thud. He did not let go immediately. His thumb brushed over the back of her knuckles, a touch that was barely there but sent a shiver racing down Mila's spine. "Careful," Dante said. His voice was low, a rumble that she felt against her back as much as she heard it. Mila scrambled away from him, spinning around to face him. She backed up until her hips hit the edge of the desk, clutching her dusting cloth like a shield. "I'm sorry," she stammered, her face burning. "I didn't hear you come in. I'm so sorry, sir." Dante watched her, his expression unreadable. He had discarded his suit jacket, wearing only a white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows, revealing strong forearms corded with muscle. He looked less like a king and more like a brawler in the quiet of the office. He looked at the paperweight, then back at her. "You are jumpy, Mila." Use of her name. It sounded strange in his mouth, too intimate. "I'm just trying to do a good job," she whispered, lowering her eyes. Dante took a step toward her. He wasn't threatening her, not exactly, but his presence demanded attention. He reached out and Mila flinched, bracing herself, but he didn't strike her. He didn't grab her. He simply reached for her hand, the one that had held the paperweight, and lifted it. Mila trembled as he turned her hand over, palm up, his eyes fixed on the inside of her wrist. There, running diagonally across the pale skin, was a thin, jagged white scar. It was old, but visible. His thumb traced the line of the scar, his touch incredibly light, almost reverent. The calluses on his fingertips rasped against her soft skin, creating a friction that made Mila's breath hitch in her throat. "How did you get this?" he asked. His tone was not demanding. It was quiet, almost gentle. Mila stared at his hand holding hers. The contrast was startling, his large, tanned hand engulfing her smaller, paler one. "I fell." She lied, her voice weak. "When I was a little girl, on a fence." It was a lie. Her father had thrown a bottle in a drunken rage when she was 12. It had shattered against the wall, and a shard had sliced her arm when she raised it to protect her face. But she would not tell Dante Varani that. She would not give him another piece of her tragedy to hold. Dante looked up from her wrist, locking eyes with her. His gaze was intense, piercing, as if he could see the lie sitting on her tongue. But he did not push. He did not demand the truth. He rubbed his thumb over the scar one last time before releasing her hand. He stepped back, creating distance between them, though the air still felt charged and heavy. "If anyone in this house touches you," he said, his voice suddenly hard, dropping back into the register of the dawn, "you tell me." Mila blinked. confused by the shift. "Sir?" "My men," Dante clarified. "The guards, the staff. If anyone puts their hands on you or makes you feel unsafe, you come to me directly." "Do you understand?" Mila looked at him, searching for the trap. Why would he care? She was a maid. She was a debtor. But the look in his eyes was deadly serious. "I understand," she whispered. "Good. Finish up here, then go." He turned his back on her, walking toward the window to stare out at the grounds, effectively dismissing her. Mila gathered her supplies with shaking hands and fled the room, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The rest of the day passed in a blur of nervous energy. Mila tried to focus on her work, scrubbing floors and polishing silver, but her mind kept drifting back to the office, the warmth of his hand, the thumb tracing her scar, the unexpected protection in his voice. Evening fell over the estate, casting long purple shadows across the gardens. Mila was tasked with taking the kitchen refuse out to the large bins near the delivery entrance at the back of the house. It was a chore she usually didn't mind. The cool air was a relief after the stifling heat of the kitchen. She hauled the heavy bag out the back door, the metal hinges groaning. As she tossed the bag into the dumpster and turned to go back inside, a figure stepped out from the shadows of the loading dock. It was Marco Bellini. He was one of Dante's lieutenants, a man with a smile that showed too many teeth and eyes that always seemed to be undressing her. He was leaning against the brick wall, smoking a cigarette, the ember glowing bright orange in the twilight. "Working late, sweetheart?" Marco asked, pushing off the wall and blocking her path to the door. Mila tightened her grip on the door handle. "Good evening, Mr. Bellini. I need to get back inside." Marco chuckled, taking a drag of his cigarette. He stepped closer, invading her personal space. The smell of smoke and stale sweat rolled off him. "You're always in such a rush," he drawled. "I see you running around this big house." "I see you coming out of the boss's office today. You were in there a long time." "I was cleaning," Mila said, her voice steady despite the fear coiling in her belly. "Sure, cleaning," Marco smirked. He reached out, his fingers brushing against her bare arm, lingering there. His skin felt clammy. "Maybe you could clean my room sometime. I could help you with that debt of yours. We could work something out." Mila recoiled as if he had burned her. She stepped back, her back hitting the brick wall. "Please don't touch me." Marco's smile faltered, replaced by a flash of annoyance. He stepped in, trapping her. "Don't be like that. I'm just being friendly. You think you're too good for me because Dante lets you dust his furniture?" He reached for her again, his hand moving toward her waist. "Get away from me," Mila snapped, raising her hands to push him back. Suddenly, a voice cut through the twilight like a whip crack. "Step away from her, Marco." The command was not loud, but it carried a weight that froze the air in Mila's lungs. Marco froze. His hand dropped to his side instantly. He spun around, his arrogant posture collapsing into something resembling fear. Dante Varani stood at the top of the stone steps leading to the back terrace. He was still in his shirt sleeves, but he looked larger than life. His face was a mask of icy fury. His shoulders were rigid, his hands curled into fists at his sides. He descended the stairs slowly, each step deliberate, like a predator closing in on a kill. "Boss," Marco stammered, backing away from Mila. We were just talking, just having a laugh." Dante did not look at Marco. His eyes were fixed on the space between Marco and Mila. He stopped 3 feet away, radiating a lethal calm that was far more terrifying than shouting. "I told you," Dante said, his voice low and vibrating with a deadly promise, "that the staff are off limits." Did I stutter? "Marco? No. Boss." "Of course not. Then why were your hands on her?" Marco swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. I didn't mean anything by it, just a misunderstanding." Dante finally looked at him. The look was cold enough to freeze hell. "Get out of my sight. If I see you near her again, you will lose the hand you tried to touch her with. Do you understand?" Yes, absolutely." Marco nodded frantically, casting one last resentful glance at Mila before turning and hurrying away into the darkness of the garden, disappearing toward the guards' quarters. Silence descended on the loading dock again. Mila stood pressed against the brick wall, her chest heaving, her hands clutching her apron. Dante stood with his back to her for a moment, watching Marco leave. Then he turned slowly. The anger drained from his face, leaving behind a stark, naked tension. His jaw was tight. He looked at her, scanning her from head to toe, checking for injuries. "Did he hurt you?" Dante asked. His voice was controlled, but Mila could hear the strain in it. Mila shook her head, unable to find her voice. She stared at him, wide-eyed. He had come for her. He had defended her. Dante took a step closer. He reached out, his hand hovering near her arm, the same arm Marco had touched, but he stopped inches away. His fingers curled inward, resisting the urge to make contact. He seemed to be fighting a war within himself. "Mila," he said, and the use of her name again broke something inside her. "Are you okay?" She saw it then. The mask had slipped. Behind the stern. Ruthless eyes of the Mafia Don. There was real concern. A flicker of humanity, a worry that had nothing to do with business and everything to do with her. "I'm okay," she whispered, her throat tight. "Thank you." Dante nodded. Once. He didn't step back. He stayed in her space, shielding her from the dark. Their eyes locked. The seconds ticked by, stretching into something dangerous. The air between them was thick with unsaid words, with the memory of the hallway, the office, and now this. She watched his gaze drop to her mouth, her breath hitched, a small, audible sound in the quiet night. Dante's pupils dilated. He leaned in, just an inch, drawn by a magnetic pull neither of them could control. Then he clenched his jaw, squeezing his eyes shut for a brief second as if in pain. He pulled back, abruptly ending the moment. "Go inside," he said, his voice rough. "Lock the door." He turned and walked away, disappearing up the stairs into the shadows of the mansion, leaving Mila standing alone in the cooling night, her heart pounding with the terrifying realization that her savior was far more dangerous to her heart than the man who had threatened her. The name Castello began to move through the Varani estate like a draft of cold air, felt before it was heard. It started in the garage, where the mechanics whispered about slashed tires and marked territory, and it drifted up to the kitchens, where the delivery drivers spoke in hushed tones about roadblocks and missing shipments. By the time the rumors reached the housekeeping staff, the threat had taken on a heavy, suffocating shape. The Castello crew was making moves in Ravensburg, and the Varani mansion was transforming from a home into a fortress. Mila Santos felt the shift in her bones. The atmosphere in the house, usually cold and precise, became brittle. Security tightened with suffocating efficiency. New faces appeared in the corridors, men with thick necks and eyes that scanned every shadow. The gates remained locked even during the day, and the delivery vans were searched before they could approach the service entrance. Every phone call seemed to be taken in a whisper. Every meeting behind closed doors lasted hours longer than usual. Mila tried to keep her head down. She focused on the rhythm of her work, counting the strokes of her broom, the folds of the laundry, the beat of her own heart. But it was impossible to ignore the tension that radiated from the men in suits. They looked like coiled springs, waiting for a reason to snap. And at the center of the storm stood Dante Varani. If the house was tense, Dante was a wire pulled to the breaking point. Mila saw it in the way he moved, his strides longer and faster, his shoulders perpetually set in a rigid line. He spent hours on the phone, his voice a low, lethal rumble that echoed through the lower floors. He stopped sleeping. Mila knew this because when she arrived in the library at dawn to clean, the ashtrays were full, and the scent of scotch hung heavy in the air. Yet as the world outside his gates grew more dangerous, Dante seemed to be drawn inward, finding strange, quiet excuses to cross her path. It began with small things. He started asking for coffee in his office at odd hours, times when he usually would have poured it himself from the carafe on the sidebar. When Mila entered with the tray, he would not dismiss her immediately. He would watch her set the cup down, his eyes tracking the movement of her hands, the curve of her neck as she bowed her head. One afternoon, While Mila was polishing the silver in the dining room, she felt a weight on her, a physical pressure against her skin. She turned to find Dante standing in the doorway. He was not looking at his phone. He was not talking to Rico. He was simply watching her. When their eyes met, he did not look away. He asked her if the Polish fumes were too strong, a mundane question that sounded bizarre coming from a man who was currently coordinating a turf war. 2 days later, she was in the kitchen, preparing a late meal for the staff. The cook had gone home, and the house was silent. Mila was chopping vegetables, humming a soft, nameless melody under her breath, a habit she had kept since childhood to soothe her nerves. She did not hear him enter. She only realized he was there when the air in the kitchen shifted, becoming heavier, charged with his specific gravity. Mila froze, her knife hovering over a red pepper. She turned slowly. Dante was leaning against the doorframe. His arms crossed over his chest. He had discarded his jacket, and his white shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, his tie gone. He looked exhausted, deep shadows bruising the skin beneath his eyes, but his gaze on her was intense and focused. "Don't stop," he said softly. Mila blinked, her pulse jumping in her throat. "Sir?" "The humming," Dante said. "It was nice. It sounded peaceful." Mila flushed, gripping the handle of the knife tighter. "I didn't know you were there. I'm sorry." Dante pushed off the doorframe and walked into the kitchen. He did not come close enough to touch her, but he entered her orbit, standing on the other side of the prep island. He picked up an apple from the fruit bowl, turning it over in his hand, studying it as if it held the secrets of the universe. "Do not apologize," he said. "Quiet is a rare commodity in this house. Mila, I take it where I can find it." He looked at her then, and the raw hunger in his expression had nothing to do with food. It was a hunger for normalcy, for the simplicity of a woman humming in a warm kitchen while the world burned down outside. He stayed there for 10 minutes, eating the apple in silence while she finished chopping, the rhythmic sound of the knife against the wood filling the space between them. When he left, he said nothing, but the air remained warm where he had been. The weather turned 3 nights later. A storm rolled in off the coast, battering Ravensburg with gale-force winds and rain that lashed against the windows like gravel. The mansion groaned under the assault, the wind howling through the chimneys. It was nearly midnight. Mila had been asked to bring a tray of tea and sandwiches to the strategy room on the 2nd floor, where Dante and his lieutenants had been holed up for 6 hours. She was exhausted, her feet ached, and her eyes burned with fatigue. She was walking down the long gallery on the 2nd floor, the heavy silver tray balanced in her hands. The storm raged outside, flashes of lightning illuminating the portraits on the walls in stark, terrifying bursts of white light. Suddenly, a deafening crack of thunder shook the house. The lights flickered once, twice, and then, with a final audible pop, the mansion plunged into absolute darkness. Mila gasped, stopping dead in her tracks. The blackness was total. It pressed against her eyes, thick and suffocating. A second later, the backup alarms began to beep, sharp, piercing sounds that echoed eerily in the vast hallway. Panic flared in her chest. She was blind. She took a hesitant step forward, trying to remember where the wall was, but her foot caught on the edge of a runner rug that had been kicked up. Mila pitched forward. She tried to correct her balance, but the heavy tray threw her off. She fell hard, her knees hitting the floor first. The tray crashed down with a catastrophic noise, shattering china and glass spraying out across the marble in the dark. She cried out, a small, sharp sound of pain and fear. She was on her hands and knees in the pitch black, surrounded by invisible shards of jagged porcelain. "Don't move!" The command came from down the hall, sharp and authoritative. It was Dante. Mila froze, her breath coming in shallow. Terrified gasps. She could hear running footsteps, heavy and fast, coming toward her. "Dante?" she whispered into the dark. "Stay exactly where you are." "Mila," he ordered, his voice getting closer. "Do not try to stand up." A moment later, the dim, amber glow of the emergency track lights buzzed to life near the ceiling. They offered barely any illumination, casting long, distorted shadows that stretched across the floor, but it was enough to see. Dante slid to a halt beside her. He was breathing hard, his gun drawn in his right hand, held low against his thigh. He scanned the hallway instantly, checking for threats, his instincts screaming that the blackout was an attack. But when he saw the shattered tea set and Mila kneeling amidst the wreckage, the soldier vanished, and the man appeared. He holstered the weapon in a fluid motion and dropped to his crouch beside her. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, his eyes scanning her face. I don't know," Mila stammered. She was shaking, the adrenaline of the fall mixing with the fear of the dark. "I dropped the tray. I'm so sorry. I couldn't see." "Forget the damn tray," Dante snapped, but there was no heat in it, only urgency. He reached out, his large hands closing gently around her wrists. His touch was warm, grounding her in the chaos. He held her hands steady, preventing her from putting them down on the floor where the razor-sharp shards of the teapot lay waiting. "Let me see," he murmured, in the dim, ghostly light. His face was inches from hers. Mila could see the faint stubble on his jaw, the dark circles under his eyes, and the tension that bracketed his mouth. He looked fierce and worried. He turned her hands over, inspecting her palms. His thumbs brushed lightly against her skin, sweeping away a crumb of broken biscuit. The sensation sent a jolt of electricity through her that had nothing to do with the storm outside. "There," he said quietly. He lifted her left hand. A small shard of white porcelain had nicked the fleshy part of her palm. A single drop of bright red blood welled up, stark against her pale skin. "It's just a scratch," Mila whispered, staring at his hands holding hers. Dante did not dismiss it. He shifted his weight, reaching into the inside pocket of his jacket to pull out a pristine white handkerchief. He unfolded it with one hand, never letting go of her with the other. "Hold still," he instructed. He pressed the cloth to her palm. He was incredibly gentle, his movements precise and careful, as if she were made of something far more fragile than the bone china she had just broken. He wrapped the handkerchief around her hand, tying it securely but not tightly. Mila watched him, her breath catching in her throat. The alarms were still beeping in the distance, and the wind was still howling outside. But in this small circle of dim light, the world had narrowed down to the two of them. She looked at his face. He was focused entirely on her hand. His lashes were long, casting shadows on his cheeks. He was so close she could smell the scent of him. Rain, expensive tobacco, and the warm, human scent of his skin. Dante finished tying the knot. He did not pull away. His fingers lingered on her wrist, his thumb resting over her pulse, which was beating a frantic rhythm against his touch. He looked up, their eyes locked. The silence that stretched between them was heavy, laden with things that could not be said. Mila felt the heat of his gaze travel down her spine. He was looking at her mouth again, with that same terrifying intensity she had seen in the hallway. "You're shaking," he said. His voice was lower now, softer than she had ever heard it. It was a voice for the dark, intimate and rough. "I hate the dark," Mila admitted, her voice trembling. Dante stared at her for a second longer, his thumb stroking the inside of her wrist in a slow, unconscious rhythm. "I know," he said. He stood up, towering over her in the gloom. He reached down, offering his uninjured hand. "Come. We need to get you out of this glass before the power comes back and you see what a mess you have made." There was a dry humor in his tone that made Mila let out a shaky breath. She took his hand. He pulled her up effortlessly, his grip firm and sure. "Stay close to me," Dante commanded. He led her away from the wreckage, guiding her down the corridor toward the staff wing. The emergency lights were sporadic here, leaving long stretches of the hallway in near total darkness. Dante did not hold her hand as they walked, but he placed his right hand at the small of her back. He did not quite touch her. There was perhaps a millimeter of space between his palm and her uniform, but the heat radiating from his hand burned through the fabric of her dress. It was a hover, a protective shield, a promise of contact that made every nerve ending in Mila's body sing. She could feel him behind her, solid and massive. She matched her steps to his, moving blindly through the dark, guided only by his presence and the phantom touch at her waist. Every step was a silent, charged line between them. The air felt thick, difficult to breathe. Mila was acutely aware of how alone they were. The guards were likely securing the perimeter. The other staff were huddled in their quarters. It was just her and the king of Ravensburg, walking through the shadows. They reached the junction where the plush carpet of the main house gave way to the wooden floorboards of the servants' wing. Dante stopped. "You will be safe from here," he said, though he did not step back. The heat of his hand was still hovering at her back. Mila turned to face him. In the shadows, he was a silhouette, broad-shouldered and imposing. "Dante," she said, the name slipping out before she could correct herself to "Sir." He went still. "Yes?" Mila clutched her wrapped hand to her chest. "I know you are not just a businessman." The statement hung in the air. It was dangerous ground. She was acknowledging the open secret, the violence that paid for the roof over her head. Dante did not deny it. He did not threaten her. He simply watched her, his eyes catching a glint of the faint light. "I never said I was." "I know," Mila whispered. I don't want any trouble. I just want to work. I just want to pay my father's debt and leave." Dante took a step closer, invading her space. The movement was aggressive, but his voice was full of a weary resignation. "Do you think I wanted this?" he asked quietly. "Do you think I walked into the library that day and saw you and thought, 'Yes, let me drag this girl into my hell'?" Mila looked up at him, startled by the bitterness in his tone. "I never intended for you to be part of this." "Mila," Dante said, his voice rough around the edges, cracking with a sudden, raw emotion. "I never intended to notice you." Mila's heart hammered against her ribs. "What do you mean?" Dante looked away, staring down the dark corridor. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration she had never seen him make. "I do not like it," he confessed, his voice dropping to a gravelly whisper. "I do not like the way you look at me when you think I am not watching. I do not like the fear in your eyes. I hate that you are afraid in my house, especially of me." He looked back at her, and the intensity of his gaze pinned her to the spot. Mila felt her breath hitch. The walls of her defenses were crumbling. She should be afraid. She was afraid. But that wasn't the only thing she felt. "It's not just fear," she whispered. The words were out before she could stop them. They were a confession, a surrender. Dante froze. The air in the hallway seemed to vanish. He looked at her, searching her face, trying to understand what she was saying. "What is it then?" he asked, his voice barely audible. Mila looked away, her cheeks burning hot in the darkness. She couldn't say it. She couldn't tell him that when he touched her wrist. She wanted him to move his hand higher. She couldn't tell him that she felt safer with him in the dark than she did anywhere else. "I don't know." She lied, her voice weak. Dante took a slow, deep breath. He stepped closer, so close that his chest brushed against hers. He raised his hand, the one that had been hovering at her back, and for a terrifying, wonderful moment, Mila thought he was going to cup her face. She thought he was going to kiss her. She tilted her head up, her lips parting, waiting, wanting. Dante's hand hovered near her cheek. His fingers trembled slightly. He wanted to... God, she could see how much he wanted to. But then, the hallway flooded with blinding white light. The generator kicked in fully. The chandeliers blazed to life overhead. The darkness was banished, and with it, the cover of the night. Dante flinched as if he had been struck. He snatched his hand back, stepping away from her instantly. The intimacy of the shadows evaporated, leaving them exposed under the harsh, unforgiving glare of the electric lights. He blinked, his face closing off, the mask slamming back into place. He looked at her one last time, his eyes dark with frustration and a profound, aching regret. "Go to your room, Mila," he said, his voice flat and distant. "Stay there until morning." He turned on his heel and walked away, his stride long and purposeful, heading back toward the war room and the violence that awaited him. Mila stood alone in the bright, empty hallway. She looked down at her hand, wrapped in the white linen handkerchief of a mafia boss. She brought the cloth to her nose and inhaled. It smelled of him. She closed her eyes, her heart aching with a mixture of relief and disappointment. The lights were back on, but she knew, with terrifying certainty, that she was still lost in the dark with him. The phone in Mila's apron pocket buzzed against her hip, a violent insect-like vibration that startled her out of her rhythm. She was stripping the linen from the guest beds in the West Wing, a mindless task that usually allowed her to drift into a numb, protective haze. But the buzzing persisted, urgent and demanding. Mila dropped the bundle of sheets onto the carpet and wiped her hands on her apron. She pulled the phone out. The screen was cracked, a spider web of glass over the display, but the name flashing there made her blood run cold. Leo. Her brother never called while she was working. He knew the rules. He knew that the Varani estate was a black hole for personal connections, a place where outside distractions were grounds for dismissal. If Leo was calling at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday, something was wrong. Mila moved to the corner of the room, away from the door, and pressed the phone to her ear. "Leo?" she whispered, her voice tight. "Mila?" Leo's voice was thin, strained, as if he were trying to keep it from cracking. "You need to come home." Mila's grip on the phone tightened until her knuckles turned white. "What happened? Is it Dad? Did he—" "No, it's not Dad." Leo cut her off, his breath coming in short, panicked hitches. "It's these men. Mila, 2 of them. They came to the apartment building an hour ago. They were knocking on the neighbors' doors, asking about us, asking about you." Mila felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. "Who were they?" "I don't know," Leo said. "Mrs. Russo downstairs said they were wearing suits, expensive ones. She said they asked where the Santos girl lives. They asked if she was still working for the Varani family. And then what?" "Leo," Mila demanded, her voice rising in panic. "Then one of them told Mrs. Russo to tell me that Varani's maid should be careful." Leo choked out. "He said that accidents happen when people choose the wrong friends." "Mila, I'm scared. They know where we live." The air left Mila's lungs. It was a physical blow, a punch to the gut that left her gasping. They had crossed the line, the invisible barrier that was supposed to separate her debt from her family, her work from her life, had been shattered. "Lock the door," Mila ordered, her voice trembling with a sudden, icy fury she had never felt before. "Do not open it for anyone, not even Dad. I am going to fix this." She ended the call without waiting for an answer. She shoved the phone back into her pocket, not caring that she might crack the screen further. The fear that had defined her existence in this house for 6 months evaporated, replaced by a white-hot rage that burned through her veins like gasoline. They had threatened Leo, her baby brother, the only innocent thing left in her life. Mila turned and marched out of the guest room. She did not walk with the invisible, shuffling gait of a maid. She walked with purpose, her heels striking the floorboards with a hard, rhythmic clatter. She passed the head housekeeper, "Mrs. Goretti, in the hallway." "Mila, Mrs." Goretti barked. "Where are you going? The linens are not finished." Mila did not answer. She did not even turn her head. She kept walking, turning the corner toward the main staircase, descending the marble steps 2 at a time. She ignored the startled looks of the guards posted at the bottom. She ignored the protocol that forbade staff from the East Wing during business hours. She reached the double oak doors of Dante's private office. The 2 bodyguards stationed there stepped forward to intercept her, their hands raising in warning. "You can't go in there, miss," one of them said, his voice bored but firm. "The boss is—" Mila didn't stop. She didn't slow down. She reached out and shoved the heavy door open with both hands, the wood groaning against the hinges as it slammed against the inner wall with a deafening crash. Dante Varani was sitting behind his desk, a phone pressed to his ear, his back to the window. He looked up, his dark eyes widening in genuine shock at the intrusion. He had expected an assassin, perhaps a rival captain. He had not expected the maid who usually trembled when he looked at her. Dante said something sharp into the phone and hung up, tossing the device onto the leather blotter. He stood up slowly, his gaze wary. Mila walked straight to the desk, the space between them, usually a canyon of power and status, vanished. She reached into her pocket, pulled out her phone, and slammed it down onto the polished mahogany surface. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the silent room. "Why are they at my house?" she demanded. Her voice was not a whisper today. It was loud, clear, and vibrating with accusation. Dante looked at the phone, then at her face. He saw the tears swimming in her furious eyes, the flush on her cheeks, the way her chest heaved with every breath. He signaled to the guards who had rushed in behind her. "Leave us," Dante ordered, never taking his eyes off Mila. "But boss—" The guards started. "Out!" Dante roared, the command cracking through the room. The guards retreated, closing the doors, sealing them in. Dante looked back at Mila. He did not yell at her for the interruption. He did not punish her for her tone. His face had gone pale, the blood draining away as the implication of her words hit him. "Who is at your house, Mila?" he asked, his voice low and deadly serious. "Men!" Mila spat, her hands curling into fists at her sides. "Men in suits, asking about me, threatening my brother, telling my neighbors that Varani's maid should be careful." She choked on a sob, forcing it down, refusing to cry in front of him. "You told me I was safe." She accused, her voice breaking. "You told me to keep my head down. I scrub your floors. I wash your clothes. I pay for my father's mistakes with my life. But you never said they would come for Leo." Dante stared at her, and for the first time since she had known him, he looked shaken. The mask of the untouchable crime lord slipped, revealing a man horrified by his own collateral damage. He knew exactly who had sent them. It was the Costello crew. They were probing the weak spots in his armor, and somehow they had realized that the girl who cleaned his office was one of them. He reached for his desk phone, punching a single button. "Rico, get in here." Dante barked into the receiver. "Now." He hung up and looked at Mila. He walked around the desk, moving toward her. Mila flinched, taking a step back. But Dante stopped. He ran a hand through his hair, his composure fracturing. "I did not know." He said, "Mila, you have to believe me. I did not know they had identified you. You made me a target," Mila cried, the tears finally spilling over. Hot tracks running down her face. "You dragged us into this. We are nothing to you, just numbers in a ledger. Pieces on a chessboard that you sacrifice so you can keep your empire." The accusation hit him like a physical blow. Dante winced. He opened his mouth to defend himself, but the doors opened and Rico rushed in, looking breathless. "What is it?" Rico asked, looking between the weeping maid and the frozen boss. "Costello sent men to her brother's apartment," Dante said, his voice cold and flat. Rico cursed, looking at the floor. "They must have tailed her on her day off. Or they have a source in personnel records. I want a team there," Dante ordered. "Not in an hour. Now. Send the Bravo unit. I want 4 men on the door, 2 in the lobby. Move the brother to a safe house if he agrees. But if he refuses, lock that building down. No one gets in. No one gets out." Rico nodded, understanding the gravity of the order. "Consider it done." Rico left, the door clicking shut again. Dante turned back to Mila. The anger had not left her eyes, but it was mixed now with a terrified exhaustion. She looked small in the middle of his office, standing on the expensive Persian rug, shaking apart. "Mila," Dante started, stepping closer. "Don't," she whispered, holding up a hand. "Don't tell me it's going to be okay. You don't get to say that. I never chose this. Dante, I never asked to be part of your war." "I know," Dante said. He took another step, closing the distance. "I know you didn't. And I hate that you are—" He reached for her. It was an instinct he couldn't suppress. He wanted to stop the shaking. He wanted to hold the pieces of her together. He placed his hands on her shoulders. Mila flinched violently, her body going rigid under his touch, but she didn't pull away. She stood there, trapped by his hands, staring up at him with wide, wet eyes. "I have been trying to keep you safe," Dante said, his voice rough with emotion. "Even if it doesn't look that way, even if I have failed. I have been trying to keep you out of the line of fire." "You failed," Mila whispered. "Yes," Dante admitted, his thumbs pressing into the fabric of her uniform, his grip tightening slightly as if he were afraid that if he let go, she would shatter. "I failed, but I will not let them touch him. Mila, I swear to you on my mother's grave, no one will touch your family." The sincerity in his voice broke the dam. The adrenaline that had carried Mila from the guest wing to his office finally ran out. leaving her hollow and trembling. A sob ripped through her chest, a ragged, painful sound. Dante hesitated. He was a man of violence, not comfort. He did not know how to hold things without crushing them. But seeing her break down, seeing the pain he had caused etched onto her face, he couldn't stand apart any longer. He pulled her in. It was not a gentle motion. It was firm, desperate. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her flush against his chest, burying her face in the expensive wool of his suit. Mila stiffened for a heartbeat, and then she collapsed against him. Her hands came up, gripping the lapels of his jacket, twisting the fabric in her fists. She cried into his chest, letting go of the terror, the stress, the endless counting of days and dollars. Dante held her. He rested his chin on the top of her head, closing his eyes. He could feel her trembling against him. He could feel the wetness of her tears soaking through his shirt. His heart hammered against his ribs, heavy and fast, a rhythm that matched hers. For a moment, the war outside didn't exist. The threats, the money, the blood. It all faded into the background. The world narrowed down to the warmth of her body and the steadiness of his hold. He was an anchor, and she was the storm, and for the first time in his life, Dante felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. "I've got you," he murmured into her hair, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through her. "I've got you. You are safe here." Mila breathed him in. He smelled of sandalwood and starch and safety. It was confusing and terrifying to feel so safe in the arms of the man who was the source of all her danger. But she couldn't let go. She needed this. She needed to feel like someone was on her side. Slowly, the sobbing subsided into quiet, hitched breaths. Mila pulled back slightly, creating a few inches of space between them. She didn't let go of his jacket. She looked up. Dante was watching her. His face was open, unguarded in a way she had never seen. His dark eyes searched hers, tracking a tear that rolled down her cheek. He lifted a hand, his knuckles brushing the tear away. His skin was rough, warm against her damp face. "Mila?" he whispered. It was a question, a plea. He tilted her chin up with his fingers, guiding her gaze to his. Mila's breath caught in her throat. Her lips parted, a silent invitation she hadn't meant to give. Her lashes were wet, clumped together, framing eyes that looked at him with a mixture of fear and wonder. Time seemed to stretch, thin and fragile. Dante leaned down. He moved slowly, giving her every second to push him away, to scream, to run. He paused a breath away from her lips, his gaze dropping to her mouth, then back to her eyes. He was asking. Mila didn't move away. She didn't breathe. Dante closed the distance. His lips brushed hers. It was soft at first, tentative, a testing of the waters. It was a kiss that asked for forgiveness as much as it asked for permission. Mila froze. Her mind screamed at her that this was wrong, that this was madness, that this was the man who owned her debt. But her heart, traitorous and loud, silenced the logic. She responded. She softened against him, her head tilting back. Her hands, which had been gripping his lapels, slid up, moving over the solid line of his shoulders, her fingers curling into the hair at the nape of his neck. A low sound rumbled in Dante's throat. The kiss deepened, shifting from tentative to urgent. He tasted of coffee and desperation. His hand, the one that had been on her shoulder, slid down her back. Settling at her waist, he pulled her closer, eliminating the last bit of space between them, pressing her hips against his. It was electric. It was a collision of two lonely orbits, a spark in the dark that flared into a flame. Mila opened to him, and the kiss became a conversation, a desperate exchange of everything they couldn't say. Fear, anger, need. Dante's arm tightened around her waist, lifting her slightly onto her toes. He wanted to consume her. He wanted to take her and hide her away from the world where nothing could ever hurt her again. But the thought was a blade, hiding her. The reality of who he was and who she was crashed back into him. He was the target. She was the leverage. Kissing her wasn't saving her. It was painting a target on her back in bright, neon red. Dante broke the kiss. He pulled back, gasping for air, his forehead resting against hers. His eyes were squeezed shut, his face twisted in a mask of pain. "No," he whispered, his voice rough and broken. "No." Mila stood there, her lips swollen, her breath coming in short pants. She blinked, dazed, the world slowly coming back into focus. "Dante." She breathed. Dante opened his eyes. They were dark, filled with a turbulent storm of desire and regret. He looked at her mouth, then forced himself to look away. "I shouldn't want this," he rasped. "Not now, not in the middle of a war." He stepped back, his hands falling away from her waist. The loss of contact was physical, a cold draft rushing into the space where his heat had been. Mila felt the rejection like a slap. She wrapped her arms around herself, shivering. The reality of what she had just done washed over her. She had kissed her boss. She had kissed the Mafia Don. She had kissed the man who had put her brother in danger. Flustered and shaken, she took a step back, stumbling slightly. I don't know what I'm doing," she whispered. Dante looked at her. His jaw clenched so tight a muscle ticked in his cheek. "You are terrified. Mila, you are looking for comfort. Do not mistake it for something else." Mila looked at him, hurt flashing in her eyes. "Is that what you think this was? Just fear?" Dante didn't answer. He couldn't tell her the truth, that it was the only real thing he had felt in years. He couldn't tell her that because if he did, he would never be able to let her go, and he had to let her go. "How can I trust you?" Mila asked, her voice trembling again. "Your world keeps hurting the people I love, and now this." She gestured vaguely between them, at the charged air that still hummed with the memory of the kiss. "I don't know if I can do this. Dante, I don't know if I can trust you." Dante looked at her, standing in the wreckage of his solitude. He straightened his spine, forcing the armor back into place. "You shouldn't," he said simply. Mila stared at him for a long moment, searching for a sign that he didn't mean it, but his face was stone. She turned and walked to the door. She paused with her hand on the brass handle, looking back one last time. Dante hadn't moved. He was watching her, a solitary figure in a room full of power, looking like a man who had just lost the only thing that mattered. Mila opened the door and left. Dante listened to her footsteps fade down the hallway. He looked down at his desk, at the spot where she had slammed her phone. He picked up his own phone, his grip threatening to crack the plastic. He had promised to protect her. And as the taste of her lingered on his lips, bitter and sweet, Dante realized with a sickening clarity that the only way to truly protect Mila Santos might be to cut her out of his life completely, even if it broke him. The betrayal arrived on a Tuesday, quiet and lethal, hidden inside a manila folder that Rico Marino placed on Dante's desk. The office was silent, save for the heavy, rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock. Outside, the sky was a bruised purple, the threat of another storm lingering over Ravensburg. "We found the leak," Rico said, his voice devoid of any satisfaction. Dante did not look up from the documents immediately. He finished signing a transfer order, his pen scratching loudly against the paper. Before he set it down and met his consigliere's gaze. "Who?" Dante asked. "It is not just a leak." "Dante," Rico said, bypassing the question. "It is a flood. Someone has been feeding the Costello crew everything. Shift changes, security blind spots, shipment routes. And they gave them the girl." Dante went still. The air in the room seemed to crystallize. "What did you say?" "They gave Costello Mila's schedule," Rico continued, his jaw tight, "and they gave them her family's address." Dante stood up. The motion was slow, controlled, but the violence radiating from him was palpable. He reached for the folder, flipping it open. The name of the traitor was there, but his mind was already racing past the betrayal to the consequence. "Where is she?" Dante demanded. "She is in the West Wing," Rico said. "She was cleaning the—" Dante's phone rang. It was the landline on his desk, the private line reserved for emergencies. But it wasn't ringing. The light was blinking. The line was dead. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through Dante's chest. He grabbed his cell phone and dialed the security post at the staff gate. "Report," Dante barked. "Boss," the guard's voice crackled. confused. "We just saw the maid leave. She was running. She said her brother was hurt." Dante dropped the phone. He didn't bother to hang up. He was already moving, rounding the desk and sprinting for the door, shouting over his shoulder. "Get the car," 10 minutes earlier. Mila had been polishing the banister on the second-floor landing. Her phone had vibrated against her hip. When she answered, a voice she didn't recognize, frantic and loud, told her that Leo had been in an accident. He was at the hospital. He was asking for her. Logic abandoned her. The fear that had been gnawing at her for days exploded. She didn't think to call Dante. She didn't think to check with security. She only thought of Leo, lying on a stretcher, paying the price for her job. She ran. She flew down the servants' stairs, bursting out of the side door and sprinting across the gravel driveway toward the staff gate. The guards, seeing her distress, opened the pedestrian lock without question. Mila stumbled onto the public road, her chest heaving. The caller had said an ambulance took him. She needed a taxi. She needed to get to St. Jude's. A gray van idled by the curb, its engine rumbling low. As Mila passed it, the side door slid open with a harsh metallic screech. Before she could turn, before she could even register the movement, 2 men in balaclavas lunged out. Mila screamed, but the sound was cut off instantly by a rough, gloved hand clamping over her mouth. An arm hooked around her waist, lifting her feet off the ground. She kicked, her canvas shoes scraping uselessly against the pavement, but they were too strong. They dragged her into the dark maw of the van. The door slammed shut, sealing out the daylight. Mila fought like a wild thing. She clawed at the hand over her face, sinking her nails into the leather glove. She thrashed and twisted, her elbow connecting with a rib cage, eliciting a grunt of pain from one of her captors. "Hold her down," a voice snarled. Weight pressed down on her legs. A heavy knee pinned her chest to the metal floor. Mila gasped for air, staring up into the blank black fabric of a mask. Tears of rage and terror blurred her vision. Zip ties cinched around her wrists, biting deep into the skin, pulling her arms painfully behind her back. Mila stopped fighting as the realization washed over her. This wasn't an accident. Leo wasn't hurt. This was the war. This was the darkness she had stepped into the moment she signed her name to the Varani ledger. As the van screeched away, throwing her against the side panel, Mila squeezed her eyes shut. She saw Dante's face. She saw the way he had looked at her in the office, the promise he had made. "I will not let anyone touch your family." He had failed, and she had been a fool to trust him. She should never have let her heart get involved with a man who lived in a world where people were snatched off the street in broad daylight. The strategy room of the Varani mansion was usually a place of cold calculation. Today, it was a blast furnace. Dante stood at the head of the table. He had not sat down in an hour. His jacket was gone, his sleeves rolled up, his tie discarded on the floor. He slammed his fist onto the heavy oak table, the sound echoing like a gunshot, making the 3 captains in the room flinch. "Find her," Dante roared. "I do not care if you have to tear every warehouse in the district apart brick by brick. You find that van." Rico stood by the monitors, his face pale. "We are tracking the cell towers. Dante, the van had swapped plates, but we have a visual on it heading toward the industrial sector. The industrial sector covers 20 square miles." Dante snapped, his voice cracking with a fury that terrified his men. "Narrow it down, now." He paced the room like a caged tiger. Every second that ticked by was a second she was in their hands. He imagined what they were doing to her. He imagined her fear. The thought made bile rise in his throat. He had promised her safety. He had kissed her and promised her she was safe, and then he had let her walk right into a trap. "If they touch her," Dante said, his voice dropping to a whisper that was far more terrifying than his shouting. "I will burn Ravensburg to the ground. I will leave nothing but ash." "Boss," the tech specialist called out, his voice trembling. "We got a ping. Her phone. They must have turned it on to taunt us, or they forgot to destroy it. It's at the old cannery, near the docks." Dante stopped pacing. He looked at the map on the screen. The cannery. That was Vince Costello's territory. "Load up," Dante ordered, grabbing his shoulder holster from the table. "We move now." "Enrico?" "Yes, boss. Bring the medic." The warehouse smelled of brine, rust, and old blood. It was a cavernous space, lit by high, yellow sodium lights that cast long, sickly shadows across the concrete floor. The sound of water lapping against the pylons outside echoed through the metal walls. Mila sat in a wooden chair in the center of the room. Her wrists were raw from struggling against the plastic ties. Her hair had come loose from its bun, falling in a tangled curtain around her face. A bruise was blooming dark and purple on her cheekbone, a souvenir from when they had dragged her out of the van. She kept her head up. She refused to cry. She refused to give them the satisfaction. Vince Costello stood in front of her. He was a thick-set man with a scar running through his eyebrow and a suit that looked cheap compared to Dante's. He was smiling, twirling a knife between his fingers. "You are a pretty little thing, aren't you?" Vince sneered. Varani always did have expensive taste. I wonder what he sees in a maid. Does he have you scrub the floors in that little outfit? Mila stared at him, her eyes burning with hatred. He sees more in me than your father sees in you. She spat. Vince's smile vanished. He stepped forward, raising his hand to strike her again. The massive metal doors of the warehouse exploded inward. The sound was deafening. The heavy lock mechanism shattered, sending shrapnel skittering across the concrete. Vince spun around. Dante Varani walked through the dust and smoke. He was not running. He was walking with the terrifying, inexorable purpose of death itself. He held a suppressed pistol in his right hand, held low. Flanking him were 4 of his best men, weapons raised, fanning out into the shadows. Dante's eyes swept the room. He ignored Vince. He ignored the 6-armed guards scrambling for cover behind crates. His gaze locked instantly on Mila. He saw the blood on her lip. He saw the bruise on her cheek. Something inside Dante broke. It was not a fracture. It was a complete annihilation of the restraint he had practiced for 30 years. "Drop them," Dante said. His voice carried across the vast space. Calm and cold? Vince laughed, though it sounded nervous. "You come into my house, Varani, for a maid? You really have gone soft." Vince grabbed Mila by the hair, hauling her chair back. He pressed the tip of his knife against her throat. Mila gasped, her head forced back, her eyes finding Dante's. "Take another step and I open her up," Vince warned. Dante stopped. He was 20 feet away. His gun was trained on Vince's head, unwavering. His body was coiled, lethal energy vibrating under his skin. "Let her go." "Vince," Dante said, "and I will let you live long enough to beg for mercy." Vince sneered, tightening his grip on Mila. "I don't think so." "Boys, kill him!" Gunfire erupted. It was chaotic and loud. Dante didn't flinch. As Vince's men opened fire from the catwalks, Dante's team returned it with surgical precision. Vince tried to drag Mila backward, using her body as a shield. Mila screamed, stomping her heel down onto Vince's instep with all her strength. Vince howled, his grip loosening for a fraction of a second. That was all Dante needed. He moved. He didn't seek cover. He advanced, walking straight into the line of fire. A bullet tore through the side of his jacket, grazing his ribs, spinning him slightly, but he didn't stop. He corrected his aim and fired a single shot. The bullet struck the revolver in Vince's hand, shattering the metal and taking 2 of Vince's fingers with it. Vince shrieked, dropping the knife and clutching his mangled hand. Mila threw herself sideways, tipping the chair over, crashing to the floor out of the line of fire. Dante was on Vince in a heartbeat. He didn't shoot him again. He holstered his weapon and pistol-whipped Vince across the jaw with a force that cracked bone. Vince hit the floor and stayed there, unconscious. Silence fell as quickly as the violence had started. The last of Costello's men had been neutralized by Rico's team. Dante didn't look at the bodies. He fell to his knees beside the overturned chair. "Mila," he choked out. He holstered his gun and pulled a knife from his boot, slicing the zip ties from her wrists with a terrified urgency. As soon as the plastic snapped, Mila scrambled up, collapsing forward into him. Dante caught her. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her so tight against his chest that he could feel her heart beating against his own. "I've got you," he whispered, burying his face in her neck. "I've got you. You're safe." Mila clutched his jacket, her fingers digging into the wool. She was shaking violently, the adrenaline crashing out of her system. She sobbed, a raw, open sound of relief. "You came. She wept against his shirt. "You came. I will always come for you." Dante swore, his voice thick with emotion. "Always." He pulled back slightly, cupping her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away the tears and the dirt. He looked at the bruise on her cheek, and his eyes darkened with a pain so profound it made Mila's breath hitch. "I am so sorry," he whispered. The safe house was a quiet, unassuming farmhouse 20 miles outside the city limits. It was sterile and secure, guarded by a dozen men who stood in the darkness of the perimeter. Inside, the air was warm. Dante sat on the edge of the bed in the master bedroom, his shirt removed, a white bandage wrapped around his ribs where the bullet had grazed him. The medic had stitched the wound and left, leaving a bottle of antiseptic and a pile of gauze on the nightstand. Mila stood by the basin, wringing out a warm cloth. She had refused to let the medic tend to the dried blood on Dante's arms. She needed to do it. She needed the task to steady her hands. She walked over to him. The room was dimly lit by a single lamp, casting soft shadows across the planes of his chest and the hard muscles of his abdomen. He watched her approach, his eyes following her every movement. "Sit still," Mila whispered. She stepped between his spread knees. She began to wipe the dried blood from his forearm, her touch feather light. She traced the lines of his veins, the scars of old battles, and the fresh bandage on his side. Dante hissed in a breath as the warm cloth touched a bruise on his shoulder. "Does it hurt?" Mila asked, pausing. "No." Dante lied. Mila looked up at him. Her eyes were red-rimmed but clear. She looked at the bandage on his ribs. "You took a bullet for me. It was a graze." Dante dismissed, but his voice lacked its usual authority. "You walked into fire," Mila corrected. "For a maid. For you," Dante said intently. "I would have walked into hell." Mila dropped the cloth into the basin. Her hands were trembling again. She looked at him, really looked at him. The man who had terrified her. The man who had saved her. The man who was currently looking at her as if she were the only source of light in the world. The fear that had defined their relationship was gone, burned away in the warehouse. What remained was something sharper, brighter, and infinitely more dangerous. She realized then how close she had come to losing him. If that bullet had been 2 inches to the left. The thought made her knees weak. She reached out, placing her hands on his bare shoulders. His skin was hot, alive. "Thank you," she whispered. Dante shook his head. "Do not thank me for cleaning up a mess I made. You saved my life," Mila said. She leaned in. She moved slowly, giving him time to stop her. But Dante didn't move. He sat frozen, his breath suspended in his chest. Mila pressed her lips to his. It was not like the kiss in the office. That had been desperate, confused. This was deliberate. It was an offering. It was an acceptance of the blood on his hands and the scar on his soul. Dante let out a ragged groan. His restraint shattered. He wrapped his arms around her waist and pulled her onto his lap. Mila gasped as her body collided with his, her legs straddling his hips, the intimacy of the position stealing the air from the room. He kissed her back with a hunger that shook them both. His hands tangled in her hair, tilting her head back to deepen the angle. He tasted of survival and need. Mila's hands explored him, tracing the line of his jaw, the column of his neck, the broad expanse of his back. She pressed herself closer, needing to feel the solidity of him, needing to prove to herself that they were both here, both alive. Dante. She breathed against his mouth. "Mila," he groaned, his forehead resting against hers. I cannot let you go. Not again. Don't," she whispered. She kissed the corner of his mouth, his jaw, the pulse point under his ear. Her fingers skimmed over the bandage on his ribs, careful and reverent. Dante pulled back just enough to look at her. His eyes were dark pools of emotion. There was no boss left in them, no cold syndicate leader. Just a man who had found his home. "Stay with me," he asked. His voice was rough, stripped bare of all defenses. "Stay with me tonight," Mila nodded. "Yes." Dante reached out and clicked off the lamp, plunging the room into darkness. But this time, the dark wasn't scary. It was a blanket, a shield. He pulled her down with him onto the bed. They held each other in the quiet, hands tracing skin, whispers lost in the fabric of the pillows. There were no more debts, no more titles, just the two of them, clinging to each other in the aftermath of the storm, promising silently that whatever came next, they would face it together. The morning sun filtered through the gaps in the heavy curtains, painting stripes of dust motes and gold across the safe house bedroom. Mila stirred, the heaviness of sleep slowly lifting, replaced by the acute awareness of the arm draped over her waist. She turned her head on the pillow. Dante was asleep. It was a sight she had never thought she would see. The lines of tension that permanently bracketed his mouth had smoothed out. His breathing was deep and even, his dark lashes resting against his cheeks. Without the armor of his suit and the weight of his empire, he looked younger. He looked like the boy in the photograph on his desk, the one who had been loved before he was hardened. Mila lay there, her heart aching with a complicated, terrifying fullness. For the first time, she allowed herself to look at him not as the Don of the Varani Syndicate, not as the man who held her father's debt, but simply as a man who had walked into gunfire for her, a man whose skin felt warm against hers. She imagined a life like this, a life where waking up next to him didn't mean hiding in a safe house with armed guards at the perimeter, a life where coffee was just coffee, not fuel for a war. The thought was seductive, wrapping around her like a warm blanket, but it was terrified by the reality of who he was. Could a man like Dante Varani ever truly stop, or would the violence always follow him, dragging her down with it? Dante shifted, his brow furrowing as consciousness returned. His eyes opened, dark and instantly alert, scanning the room before settling on her face. The hardness melted away, replaced by a sleepy, unguarded softness that made Mila's breath hitch. "Good morning," he rasped, his voice rough with sleep. "Good morning," Mila whispered. He pulled her closer, burying his face in the crook of her neck, inhaling deeply. For a few minutes, they pretended the world outside didn't exist, but the world had a way of breaking in. The burner phone on the nightstand buzzed, vibrating aggressively against the wood. Dante stiffened. The man was back. The lover vanished, replaced instantly by the boss. He sat up, wincing slightly as the movement pulled at the stitches in his side, and grabbed the phone. "Varani," he answered, his voice cold and clear. Mila sat up, pulling the sheet around her, watching his face. She saw his jaw clench. She saw the knuckles of his hand turn white as he gripped the phone. "Are you sure?" Dante asked. He listened for another moment, his expression darkening into a lethal mask. "I want him at the garage. Noon. Tell him I am ready to negotiate terms of surrender." He hung up and tossed the phone onto the bed. He ran a hand through his hair, letting out a long, ragged breath. "Rico found the traitor," Dante said, looking at the wall. "Who?" Mila asked, though a cold knot was already forming in her stomach. "Marco Bellini," Mila gasped. Marco, the lieutenant who had cornered her by the loading dock, the man with the clammy hands and the eyes that undressed her. It made sickening sense. His ambition, his resentment when Dante had humiliated him in front of her. It had all festered into betrayal. "He has been working with Costello for months," Dante continued, his voice devoid of emotion. "He gave them the routes. He gave them your brother's address. And he is not alone. Rico believes Marco has a dozen men inside the organization ready to flip." "What are you going to do?" Mila asked. Dante turned to her. He didn't answer the question. Instead, he reached out and took her hand, his grip bordering on painful. "I am getting you out," he said. Mila blinked. "What?" "Rico has a car waiting. There is a plane at the private airfield. I have set up an account in your name in Zurich. It is enough money to pay your father's debt 10 times over and start a new life. You grab Leo and you go today." He was sending her away. The realization hit Mila like a physical slap. After everything, after the warehouse, after the night they had just shared, he was cutting her loose. "No," Mila said. Dante looked at her, his eyes pleading. "Mila, listen to me. This is about to end, and it is going to end badly. Marco is expecting a negotiation, but I am going there to burn the rot out of my organization. It will be a bloodbath. I cannot protect you if you are here." "I am not leaving you," Mila said, her voice rising. Dante stood up. pacing the small room. "You have to. Do you think I want this? I want you to be safe. I want you to live a life where you do not have to know what a gunshot sounds like. I know what a gunshot sounds like because you took a bullet for me," Mila shouted, standing up to face him, ignoring the trembling in her legs. "You risked everything to get me out of that warehouse. And now you think I am just going to take a check and run? You think I am going to leave you to face them alone?" Dante stopped pacing. He looked at her, stunned by her ferocity. "Running won't fix anything, Dante," Mila said, stepping closer, her eyes blazing with tears she refused to shed. "If I leave now, I leave the best part of myself behind. I leave you." Dante stared at her. He saw the stubborn set of her jaw, the fire in her eyes. She was not a maid anymore. She was a partner. She was a survivor. He closed the distance between them, grabbing her face in his hands and kissing her hard, a kiss of desperation and gratitude. "You are a fool," he whispered against her lips. "Maybe," Mila replied, her voice shaking, "but I am your fool." Dante rested his forehead against hers. He knew he couldn't force her. And God help him, he didn't want to be alone. "Fine," he said, "but you stay with Rico. You stay in the car. You do not come out until I say it is over." The meeting place was an abandoned parking garage on the edge of the city, a concrete skeleton of a building that smelled of gasoline and decay. The wind whistled through the open sides, carrying the distant sound of the city that had no idea a war was ending in its underbelly. Dante stood in the center of the third level. He wore a black coat over his suit to hide the bandage on his ribs. He was alone, standing in the open, a perfect target. Mila watched from the back seat of a black sedan parked 3 ramps down, hidden in the shadows. Rico sat in the driver's seat, checking his weapon, his eyes glued to the rearview mirror. "Stay down." "Mila," Rico muttered, "if this goes sideways, I am driving us out of here through the wall if I have to." Mila didn't answer. She peered over the edge of the window tint, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Up on the third level, a convoy of 3 cars rolled to a stop. Doors opened. Marco Bellini stepped out. He looked smug. He wore a tailored suit that was too shiny, a poor imitation of Dante's style. He was flanked by 6 men, traitors, all of them. "Dante," Marco called out, his voice echoing off the concrete pillars. "You look tired, boss." "I am tired, Marco," Dante replied, his voice calm, carrying effortlessly in the quiet. "I am tired of looking at a rat and pretending it is a lion," Marco's smile faltered. He motioned for his men to spread out. "You always did have a sharp tongue. Shame it's going to get you killed. Costello sends his regards. He says the city belongs to the future, not the past." "The future?" Dante asked, taking a slow step forward. "You think you are the future, Marco? You are a middleman. You sold your loyalty for a promise from a man who would shoot you the moment you became inconvenient. Better than being a dead king." Marco spat. Mila watched, her breath fogging the glass. She saw the tension in Marco's shoulders. She saw the way his hand drifted toward the small of his back. "He's going to shoot him," Mila whispered. Rico cursed. "Hold on, up on the concrete stage, the conversation was ending. Surrender the territory. Dante," Marco said, "sign the papers, and maybe I let you walk away." "There are no papers," Dante said. Marco's eyes narrowed. "Then there is no deal." Marco reached behind his back. He wasn't reaching for a contract. He was drawing a gun that he had taped there, hidden from a casual glance. Dante was fast, but he was injured. He was favoring his left side. He wouldn't be fast enough. Mila didn't think. She didn't calculate the odds. She didn't remember Rico's order to stay down. She threw open the car door. The sound of the heavy metal door slamming against the concrete barrier echoed like a thunderclap in the silent garage. "Dante!" Mila screamed, her voice tearing through the air. Marco flinched. His head snapped toward the noise, distracted for a fraction of a second by the unexpected shout from the shadows. That split second was all Dante needed. He moved with a fluid, practiced lethality. He drew the pistol from his shoulder holster before Marco could refocus. 2 shots rang out. Bang, bang! The first shot hit Marco in the shoulder. Spinning him around, the gun flew from his hand, skittering across the concrete floor. Marco screamed, clutching his shoulder, falling to his knees. Chaos erupted. Marco's men raised their weapons, but before they could fire, red laser dots appeared on their chests from the shadows of the ramps above and below. Dante's loyalists, men Rico had positioned hours ago, stepped out. "Drop them!" Rico roared. Stepping out of the car with an assault rifle raised, the traitors froze. They looked at Marco, bleeding on the ground. They looked at Dante, who stood with his gun trained on Marco's head, his face a mask of cold fury. "It is over," Dante said. "One by one." The weapons clattered to the floor. Dante didn't look at the men. He walked over to Marco, kicking the fallen gun away. He looked down at the man who had betrayed him, the man who had threatened Mila. "You lose," Dante said simply. Dante turned his head, his eyes searching the shadows until they found Mila, who was standing by the open car door, her hands covering her mouth, shaking. He started to walk toward her, but then the sound of sirens began to wail in the distance. Not 1 or 2, but dozens, a symphony of approaching authority. Marco laughed, a wet, pained sound. "You hear that, Dante? The cops. You're finished too. We both go down." Dante looked back at him. "I know, I called them." Marco's eyes went wide. You rat." Dante holstered his gun. He looked at his loyal men. "Leave the weapons," Dante ordered, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Hands in the air. We surrender. No one fires a shot." "Boss?" one of the men asked, confused. "It is done," Dante said. "The Varani syndicate ends today." The sirens grew louder, filling the garage with blue and red strobe lights that bounced off the concrete walls. Tires screeched as police cruisers swarmed the ramps. Dante walked over to Mila. He had blood on his shirt from where his wound had reopened during the movement. He was breathing hard, sweating, but he looked lighter than she had ever seen him. "Why?" Mila whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Why did you call them?" "Because I am done," Dante said, his voice rough but certain. "I cannot protect you if I am the Dawn. I cannot love you if I am at war. I would rather go to prison as a man than live in that mansion as a monster." He reached out, his bloody hand hovering near her cheek before he pulled it back, not wanting to stain her. Mila didn't care about the blood. She stepped close, closing the gap, and cupped his face in her hands. She pulled him down and kissed him. It wasn't a kiss of passion. It was a vow. It was a promise sealed in the middle of a crime scene. "I will wait," she whispered fiercely against his lips. "I don't care how long. I will stand by you. Through the courtrooms, through the headlines, through the prison sentences, as long as you keep choosing this, as long as you keep choosing us." Dante rested his forehead against hers, closing his eyes as the police shouted commands to get on the ground. "I choose you," Dante whispered. "I choose you, Mila." He pulled away, raising his hands in the air, and turned to face the oncoming lights. The fall of the Varani syndicate was the headline of the year. The trials lasted for months. The courtroom was a circus of reporters and flashbulbs, detailing the decades of crime that had run Ravensburg. But the story had a twist. Dante Varani, the ruthless head of the family, turned state's witness. He gave them everything. The corruption in the city council, the connections to the Costello crew, the money laundering schemes that spanned 3 continents, in exchange for dismantling the entire organized crime network of the state. Dante was given a reduced sentence. Mila was there every day. She sat in the back row, wearing plain clothes, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Whenever Dante was led in his orange jumpsuit and shackles, his eyes would find hers, and in that brief connection, they held an entire conversation of patience and hope. He served 3 years in a minimum security facility. Mila wrote to him every week. She moved Leo to a safe apartment, worked 2 jobs, and saved every penny. She waited. And then, one day, the gates opened. 2 years later, the kitchen was small, painted a cheerful, buttery yellow that caught the afternoon sun. It was nothing like the industrial, stainless steel cavern of the Varani mansion. There was no marble here, just scuffed linoleum and a wooden table that wobbled slightly on one leg. Mila stood at the counter, her hands dusted with white flour. She was wearing jeans and a soft, oversized sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders. She was laughing. Dante stood behind her, kneading dough. He wore a simple gray t-shirt and denim. The expensive suits were gone, replaced by the uniform of a man who worked with his hands in a local carpentry shop. The tension was gone from his shoulders. The shadows were gone from under his eyes. "You are making a mess," Dante grumbled, though his eyes were crinkling with amusement. "I am making dinner," Mila corrected, turning to face him. "You are just criticizing my technique." Dante smirked. "My technique is better." He reached out to grab the rolling pin, but his hand brushed against her waist. He paused, his touch lingering, warm and solid. He pulled her gently into his arms, trapping her against the counter. He held her like she was something precious, something he had fought a war to keep. Mila looked up at him. She reached up and wiped a smudge of flour from his cheek, her fingers tracing the faint scar on his jaw that remained from that night in the warehouse. He leaned down, nuzzling his face into her neck, his stubble grazing her sensitive skin. He kissed the spot just below her ear, making her shiver. She laughed, breathless and light. "Touch me again and I'll scream," she teased, the words an echo of a dark hallway a lifetime ago. Dante pulled back to look at her, a smile playing on his lips, a real, genuine smile that reached his eyes. Mila smiled back, her heart swelling so full she thought it might burst. "From happiness," she finished softly. Dante kissed her forehead, then her nose, and finally, her lips. It was a warm, unhurried kiss, tasting of flour and coffee and peace. "I love you," he whispered. "I love you," Mila replied. Outside the window, the sun was setting over a quiet street in a town far away from Ravensburg. Leo was in the living room, watching a game. The world was quiet. They carried their scars, invisible and visible, but they were free. They were no longer boss and maid. They were just Dante and Mila, two people who had found their way out of the dark hall and into the light together. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope you enjoyed the journey of Dante and Mila as much as I enjoyed writing it for you. If you liked this story, please let me know in the comments. I would love to hear where you are listening from and what your favorite part of the story was. Was it the tension in the hallway or the quiet moment in the kitchen? Please don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the Mafia Romance Stories channel for more emotional, heart-pounding tales of love and redemption. Your support means the world to me. Until next time, keep believing in love.